So we have some important news and updates on the current efforts to remove suppressors and short-barreled rifles from the NFA nationwide through the efforts of the Short Act and the Hearing Protection Act and all the things that are going on right now with the Parliamentarian and the Big Beautiful Bill. So let's talk about what is currently going on. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel for free, just consider subscribing to the channel. Of course, that's free to do. Double check to make sure YouTube is not unsubscribed you. And then just drop a positive comment down below because that tells the algorithm that you appreciate this type of video and it should share it to more people. So we need to talk about what is happening right now with the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act and the current efforts to get this language passed in H.R. 1 and get it into the Big Beautiful Bill. Now, over the weekend, I was out in Ohio and we saw that the Senate Parliamentarian, which is an unelected bureaucrat, she decided to override and remove the Short Act and the Hearing Protection Act from the Big Beautiful Bill. So through the reconciliation process and the review of that, she determined that, that language could not be added, and so she overrid it. That day, I had multiple conversations with organizations and individuals in the, Second Amendment space. And, there was a lot of questions about what is going on right now. We got some secondhand information about some of the rationale that she came to about why she overrode that language. And she was in favor potentially of reducing the AOW tax to zero, but not in favor of the complete removal of suppressors and SBRs entirely from the NFA because that didn't pass the Byrd rule and all of those things. So there was a lot of questions about what was going on. And over the weekend, we've seen that there's been a lot of things, develop over this. And it was also really perplexing when you look at some of the inconsistent approach that she had in regards of reducing some of the, AOW tax, but she was not in favor of really calling the SBR restrictions and the, suppressor restrictions a tax themselves. But we always knew that the removal of the registration in the register itself was kind of going to be the big hurdle that you would have to get over, and that the Senate Parliamentarian was not going to really be in favor of that. But that doesn't mean we give up the efforts, and there's been a lot of efforts going forward to actually get this language as we wanted included in the bill. Now, over the weekend, there were some amendments and proposals that were sent to consideration to the Parliamentarian to reduce the SBR and suppressor taxes to zero, similar to how she was in favor of reducing the AOW tax, but essentially also still keeping the registry and all of that in place. This is essentially taking the HPA and the potentially Short Act back to the versions that the House committee passed and what they were potentially in favor of. Of course, we're not, that's not the biggest win that we want. That's not the version of the bill that I'm in favor of, but that was what was amended and sent back in. There were also a ton of efforts to get Thune to remove the Parliamentarian or to override her decision. Now, this fight is still ongoing right now as I speak. There's a lot of efforts still trying to get this language back in multiple versions. Some people want the $0, tax added in. They think that's the only thing that could potentially even pass. And then there's people who are in favor, like me, of the full removal of the registry in the original version. I'm just going to read to you right now what GOA just submitted out. They, I believe, posted it on X and all their other platforms. They give a breakdown of their opinion about where things are currently, what their stance is. And I know other organizations have different positions right now, but I'm going to read to you what GOA is saying their position is and what they believe the path forward is when it comes to the Short Act and the Hearing Protection Act and potentially getting rid of the Parliamentarian and all the efforts and, the main things that they are focused on right now. But this is what GOA is saying. So GOA is saying, GOA is doing everything in our power to fight a two-front battle to restore your rights on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. As the Senate is moving the revised $0 NFA tax language, GOA is still fighting to fully repeal the NFA excise tax on silencers and short-barreled firearms and to eliminate federal gun registration. But there is a lot of But they state that there is a lot of misinformation and bad strategy floating around, which we must correct. Now, again, this is just in GOA's opinion. They state, however, that there is misinformation and bad strategy floating around, which they believe they must correct. Now, I know the guys at GOA. I actually know a lot of people in all the organizations. I was just out in Ohio with Eric Pratt and a lot of the GOA guys. I know they spend a lot of time on this, and all weekend they're working on this. So this is what they believe is the strategy going forward. They state that, first and foremost, GOA is fighting the Parliamentarian's ruling. The Parliamentarian should be fired, they state. And if Leader John Thune will not fire her, her non-binding advice should be ignored and overruled by the Senate President, which is J.D. Vance, or the President pro tempore, which is Chuck Grassley. GOA is pressing for both of these strategies in the Senate, and all through this weekend, we have been rallying the grassroots with alerts urging gun owners to demand that their senators support these outcomes. And I would call you in this video to continue to call your Senate representatives, call Thune, put pressure on Vance and Grassley and Thune online as well to get them to pass the version that we want. GOA goes on to state that if the parliamentarian is fired, or if the Senate president or president pro tempore begin overruling the parliamentarian, gun owners of America and our allies will work to reinsert the full NFA repeal language into this bill. However, if none of these elected officials will stand up to this unelected bureaucrat, then her ruling will unfortunately stand. In the interim, they state, while the parliamentarian's outrageous ruling stands, we are also using the Senate rules to gut the NFA as much as possible. They state that gun owners will remember that when the fight was in the House, we demanded that the representatives go further than just reducing the tax to $0. We worked for a drastic gutting of the NFA and we were successful. Unfortunately, the parliamentarian's ruling severely limits that victory. And that is why, even while we still work to overturn her ruling, we are also trying to lessen the amount of infringements that gun owners suffer to a maximum extent allowable under the rules and precedents of the Senate. This would be a case if the $200 tax is reduced to zero. They state that we will keep you posted as the birdbath continues. Gun owners must realize that there is no alternative to the above strategy and there is no third Crenshaw option for gun owners. They state that Dan Crenshaw came up with a great strategy for his own language dealing with the transgender issue, but this will not apply to the NFA, and they state here is why. Representative Crenshaw's strategy is built on the hope that Democrats will not object to his language, and that makes this a win-win situation for him despite the parliamentarian's ruling. Crenshaw is betting that the Democrats are afraid to touch that issue because it will bring them bad publicity. So he is hoping that his language can sail under the radar without Democrats raising a point of order against it under the Byrd Rule, a tactic that allows any senator to strike non-budgetary language from a budget reconciliation bill. Alternatively, he knows if Democrats raise the point of order and defeat his language, then they'll receive public backlash. This strategy will not work for the NFA, according to GOA. There is no situation where the Democrats will not raise a point of order against our NFA language. Senator Schumer, they state, has already promised to fight our language himself. So pushing forward without removing or overruling the parliamentarian guarantees that gun owners will lose everything and be left with nothing. Likewise, there is no way that 53 Republicans can vote to overrule the parliamentarian under the rules of the Senate. Only Senate President Vance or the President pro tempore Grassley can overrule the parliamentarian by ignoring her non-binding advice, which is exactly what GOA has been pushing for. Without the help of the Senate President or the President pro tempore, it will require 60 votes to waive or bypass the Byrd Rule for our NFA repeal language. That would essentially force gun owners to overcome the equivalent of a filibuster, which is exactly what we are trying to avoid. And then they go on to talk about the $0 NFA tax on suppressors and short-barreled rifles. They state that if the parliamentarian finds that the $0 tax for suppressors and SBRs is compliant under the Byrd Rule, then Senator Schumer will have lost his leverage. He can object to the provision, but he would need 60 votes to get the NFA tax repeal stricken from the bill. Second, if the parliamentarian finds that the $0 tax is out of order, then gun owners will get absolutely nothing because the Senate GOP will need to corral the 60 votes to overrule her. They state that if this happens, we will clearly use the second hyperpartisan ruling as even more evidence that the parliamentarian is not performing her job unbiasedly and needs to be fired. They state that the $0 tax is clearly not everything we wanted, but it's not a compromise because it would be repealing existing infringements on gun owners. Not only that, it would serve to both proliferate NFA firearms under the common use test and give us greater leverage to challenge the NFA in court. So I know there's a lot of back and forth right now about the amended bill and the reduction of the tax only and potentially just getting that and not getting the registry. But I know there are multiple organizations right now, GOA themselves as well, and a lot of organizations and a lot of 2A champions who are actually trying to get the full language put back in, fully restored, or bypass the parliamentarian, put pressure to fire the parliamentarian or to get Vance or Chuck Grassley to override her. So there's a lot of efforts right now, and it seems like the backlash that we've had against the parliamentarian has finally actually reached Trump. And we just got a statement today from Trump on social media, and he states that the great Congressman Greg Stube is 100% correct. An unelected Senate staffer, the parliamentarian, should not be allowed to hurt the Republicans' bill. He states that she wants many fantastic things out of the bill, and he states no. So right now there are multiple efforts. There are multiple strategies right now from different organizations. Everybody's putting pressure on the Senate, on Representative Thune, Vance, Grassley. There's a lot of effort. Trump himself, there's a lot of efforts right now to get the Short Act and the HPA added back in the full language. Everybody has varying opinions on what strategy would work. This is what GOA believes would work. So that's what's currently going on with the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act. We need to keep putting pressure on Thune, Grassley, Vance, and Trump to get this done. There's a lot of strategies that are being floated out there right now, but none of this gets done if you don't contact your representatives, if you don't put pressure on them. It seems like Trump is finally hearing that the Parliamentarian is doing horrible things. I don't know if he's hyper focused on the Short Act or the HBA, but one of the good things is Trump has spoken out now against the Parliamentarian, and potentially that would put pressure to actually get her fired. And that would be good for our effort as well to get the full language of the Short Act and the Hearing Protection Act added back in and override what she said. So continue to flood their phones, their emails, their social media accounts, and let your voices be heard. I will try to keep you guys updated as it develops. This is changing rapidly. It could change even after I post this video. So I will let you guys know as it develops. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.